They came with clipboards and threats of fines, but left in handcuffs. Turns out impersonating HOA officials on a former Navy SEALs ranch was the last mistake these scammers would ever make as free men. The morning started like any other on my 15-acre ranch in rural Texas. I was up before dawn, the way you never quite unlearn after 2 decades in the service. 22 years as a Navy SEAL teaches you a lot of things, but sleeping in isn't one of them. I poured my coffee black, stepped out onto the porch of my ranch house, and watched the sunrise paint the sky above my property. Land I'd purchased with my retirement savings, a place far away from the chaos of deployment zones or the confines of suburbia. My name is Jack Reeves, and after 4 tours in Afghanistan, 3 in Iraq, and classified operations in places I still can't name, all I wanted was peace and quiet. My closest neighbor was 3 miles down a dirt road, and that's exactly how I liked it. The ranch was simple but sturdy, a place where I could raise a few horses, grow my own food, and live by my own rules. Little did I know that my peaceful existence was about to be shattered by the most ridiculous adversary I'd ever faced, a fake homeowners association that didn't even exist. It was just after noon when I heard the sound of vehicles coming up my long gravel driveway. Through my kitchen window, I spotted 3 black SUVs kicking up dust as they approached. No markings, no official emblems, just tinted windows and an air of unwarranted authority. In my experience, people who want to look official without actually being official are the most dangerous kind. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee mug still in hand, my other hand resting casually near the Glock 19 holstered at my hip. Texas being Texas, and old habits dying hard. 5 individuals exited the vehicles with the practiced synchronization of people who thought they knew what they were doing. 3 men, 2 women, all dressed in matching navy blue polo shirts with some kind of embroidered crest and khaki pants. The leader, a balding man with a mustache that seemed to be compensating for the hair he'd lost up top, approached with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he was used to getting his way. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Charles Winfield, Chief Enforcement Officer of the Prairie Hills Estates Homeowners Association. We've received multiple complaints about code violations on your property, and we're here to conduct an inspection." I took a slow sip of my coffee, scanning each face. Something was off. Very off. "That's interesting," I replied calmly, "considering there is no Prairie Hills Estates within 50 miles of here, and my property isn't part of any HOA. Winfield's smile tightened. "Perhaps you weren't properly informed when you purchased the property, but this entire area falls under our jurisdiction. We have authority to assess fines for violations and even place liens on properties that don't comply. 22 years in special operations teaches you to recognize threats of all kinds, including the bureaucratic ones. I'm going to need to see some identification and legal documentation proving your authority on my private property," I said, my voice steady but firm. That's when Winfield's demeanor changed. The fake smile vanished, replaced by something harder, colder. "Listen, Mr. Reeves, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Our association has agreements with local law enforcement. You don't want to make this difficult." 2 of his companions moved to flank him, trying to create an intimidating front. The woman to his left had her hand on what looked like a taser poorly concealed under her polo shirt. The man to his right was built like a former linebacker, clearly there for muscle. "Step off my property now," I said quietly. "Whatever scam you're running stops here." Winfield laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You military types always think you're above the rules. We've dealt with your kind before." He gestured to the others. "Start the inspection. Document everything." The group began to spread out, heading toward my barn and workshop. One pulled out a camera and started taking pictures of my house. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing. "This is your final warning," I called out. "You are trespassing on private property. Leave now or I will consider this an illegal invasion of my home." The linebacker type turned and sneered. "What are you gonna do, old man? Call the cops?" We are the authority here. 22 years as a SEAL taught me many things. Patience was one of them. Violence as a last resort was another. But recognizing a threat to my home and responding accordingly. That was lesson number 1. I reached inside the door and hit the silent alarm I'd installed that connected directly to the sheriff's department. Living remote has its advantages, but it also means help is often 30 minutes away. You learn to be self-sufficient. I don't know who you people really are, I said, stepping down from my porch, but you've made 3 critical mistakes today. I held up one finger. First, you targeted a property outside any legitimate HOA jurisdiction. A second finger. Second, you're impersonating officials, which is a felony in the state of Texas. A third finger. And third, you picked a homeowner who spent his career identifying threats and neutralizing them. The group hesitated, exchanging glances. Something in my tone must have finally registered as a warning. But Winfield wasn't backing down. Are you threatening us? He demanded, his face flushing red. That's another violation we can add to your growing list. I shook my head slowly. Not a threat. Just giving you the chance to leave peacefully before this gets complicated. Your choice. The woman with the taser took a step forward, hand moving to her hip. Mr. Winfield, should I call for backup? That's when I smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind that never reaches your eyes. The kind my teammates would recognize from missions when things were about to get interesting. There is no backup, I said simply. Because you're not what you claim to be. Now, who wants to explain what you're really doing on my property before the sheriff arrives? The mention of the sheriff changed the atmosphere instantly. The 2 in the back, who had been heading toward my workshop, stopped in their tracks. The woman's hand moved away from her taser. Only Winfield seemed determined to maintain the charade. This is ridiculous. We have every right. Cut the act, I interrupted. I've spent my life reading people in high-stress situations. Your pupils are dilated. You're sweating through that polyester polo, and your accomplices are already planning their exit. Whatever scam you're running, it ends here. That's when the linebacker made his move. He rushed forward, perhaps thinking his size would be enough to intimidate me or knock me down. 22 years of combat training kicked in automatically. I sidestepped his charge, used his momentum against him, and had him face down in the Texas dirt before he knew what happened, his arm locked behind his back, at an angle that promised significant pain if he struggled. Anybody else want to try something stupid? I asked calmly, as if I were inquiring about the weather. The remaining 3 fake HOA enforcers backed up toward their vehicles. Only Winfield remained in place, his face a mixture of shock and calculation. You've just assaulted a homeowners association official, he spluttered, but the conviction in his voice was faltering. No, I corrected him, maintaining the hold without breaking a sweat. I've detained a trespasser attempting to assault me on my own property. Big difference in the eyes of Texas law. In the distance, I could hear the welcome sound of sirens approaching. Sometimes living in a small county has its advantages. When the sheriff's department gets an alert from a decorated veteran, they tend to prioritize the response. Sheriff Martinez arrived with 2 deputies, his cruiser kicking up dust as it came to a stop in my driveway. A no-nonsense lawman with 25 years on the job, Martinez took one look at the scene, me restraining the linebacker, the fake HOA crew looking nervous by their vehicles, and Winfield still trying to maintain his authority, and immediately sensed something was off. Jack, he nodded to me. Want to tell me what we've got here? I released the linebacker, who scrambled to his feet, rubbing his shoulder. These folks claim to be from something called the Prairie Hills Estates HOA. Say I'm in violation of their codes. Problem is, no such HOA exists out here. Martinez frowned. Prairie Hills Estates. That development's over in Henderson County, good 60 miles from here. Winfield's face went pale. Martinez approached him, hand resting casually on his service weapon. Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. What followed was the rapid unraveling of an elaborate scam. As the deputies separated the group for questioning, the truth emerged piece by piece. They weren't an HOA at all, but a sophisticated group of con artists who had been targeting remote properties across 3 counties. Their scam was simple but effective. Identify isolated homeowners, preferably older or less confrontational types. Show up with official-looking documents claiming HOA violations, then demand immediate payment of fines to avoid legal action or property lines. Most victims, intimidated by the official appearance and threats of legal consequences, would pay rather than fight. They'd collected tens of thousands of dollars already. "You picked the wrong ranch today," Sheriff Martinez said, snapping handcuffs on Winfield. "Impersonating officials, attempted extortion, trespassing, and that's just for starters." As the deputies led the fake HOA crew to their patrol cars, Sheriff Martinez stayed behind to take my statement. "You know," he said, leaning against his cruiser, "most folks would have been intimidated enough to just pay them off." I shrugged. I faced scarier threats than a fake HOA. Martinez chuckled. "I bet you have. Still, they've successfully scammed at least a dozen homeowners that we know of. Mostly elderly folks living alone, veterans on fixed incomes, people who couldn't afford to pay but were too scared not to." That detail hit me harder than any physical threat could have. Targeting vulnerable veterans, my brothers and sisters in arms, made my blood boil in a way that their trespassing on my property hadn't. "I want to help," I said. "Whatever you need to make sure they're prosecuted to the fullest extent." Martinez nodded. "We'll need your testimony, for sure. But there might be something else you could do." 2 weeks later, I found myself speaking at the VFW Hall in town, surrounded by fellow veterans and elderly residents from across the county. With Sheriff Martinez's support, I'd organized a community awareness program about common scams targeting rural homeowners and how to protect yourself. "Trust your instincts," I told the packed room. "If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. You've all survived tough times, whether in service or just in life. You've got better instincts than any scammer out there." The legal aftermath of the fake HOA incident unfolded over several months with a thoroughness that gave me satisfaction. The judicial system, for all its flaws, worked as intended when faced with such clear-cut criminality. Winfield, the mastermind behind the operation, received the harshest sentence: 8 years in Texas State Prison for multiple felony counts, including impersonating officials, criminal conspiracy, fraud, attempted extortion, and trespassing. His sneering confidence had evaporated entirely during the sentencing, replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of a man who suddenly realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. The linebacker who had tried to rush me got 5 years, his physical intimidation tactics adding assault charges to his record. The others in the crew received between 2 and 5 years each, depending on their level of involvement and prior records. But the sentences themselves were only the beginning of justice. The court also imposed substantial restitution orders. Each scammer would be paying back their victims for years after release. Sheriff Martinez made sure I was kept in the loop about each development, knowing how personally I had taken their targeting of vulnerable veterans. The money they had stolen would find its way back to those who needed it most, though the sense of security they had shattered would take longer to restore. During the months leading up to the trial, I had gotten to know some of the other victims. Their stories affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. Harriet Jensen, an 81-year-old widow of a Vietnam veteran, had paid the scammers nearly $3,000, money she had been saving for needed roof repairs. Frank Delgado, a 76-year-old former Army medic, had been so intimidated by their threats of property lines that he had written them a check for $1,800, money that was supposed to cover his heart medication for the next 6 months. These weren't just anonymous victims. They were my brothers and sisters in arms, or the spouses who had stood by them through deployments and nightmares and all that came after. The court proceedings brought a legal conclusion, but something inside me remained unsettled. I had spent my career addressing threats directly, eliminating them with precision and purpose. But this situation revealed a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy wasn't a hostile combatant, but a predatory system that viewed vulnerability as an opportunity for exploitation. How many other scams were operating in rural communities like ours, targeting those least equipped to defend themselves? This question led to what began as a simple conversation with Sheriff Martinez one evening on my porch, the Texas sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds as we discussed what could be done beyond prosecuting this particular group. "These folks won't be the last to try something like this," Martin said, sipping the bourbon I had poured him. "Scammers evolve, adapt. They'll find new uniforms to wear, new authority to fake. Then we need to evolve faster," I replied, the beginnings of an idea taking shape. In the teams, we had a saying: train like you fight, fight like you train. What if we trained our community to recognize these threats before they become dangerous? The idea gained momentum quickly. With Martinez's support, I organized a community awareness presentation at the local VFW hall. I expected perhaps 20 or 30 people to show up. Instead, over 100 packed the room, many standing along the walls when the chairs ran out. Veterans of every era sat alongside elderly residents, young families, and community leaders, all united by concern and a desire to protect themselves and their neighbors. That first presentation was rough around the edges. I wasn't a natural public speaker. In my former career, communication was often limited to hand signals and radio brevity codes. But what I lacked in polish, I made up for in authenticity and practical knowledge. I broke down the tactics the fake HOA had used. The official-looking uniforms, the credentials that didn't stand up to scrutiny, the pressure tactics designed to provoke immediate compliance without allowing time for verification. "They count on your politeness," I explained to the crowd. "They count on your respect for authority. But real authority can withstand questioning. Real officials will have legitimate identification and won't resist when you call to verify who they are." After my presentation, something unexpected happened. People didn't leave. Instead, they formed a line to speak with me, many sharing their own experiences with various scams. Phone calls claiming to be from the IRS, fake utility workers trying to gain access to homes, email scams targeting pension funds. What had begun as a one-time information session revealed itself as the tip of a much larger iceberg. By the end of that evening, a dozen veterans had approached me about forming something more permanent, a regular gathering to share information and strategies for community protection. Among them was Miguel Ramirez, a former Marine who had served in Desert Storm and now ran the local hardware store. His business acumen complemented my security background, and together we sketched out a framework for what would become the Rural Veterans Protection Network. Within 3 months, what started as an informal gathering at the VFW had evolved into a structured program with monthly meetings across 3 counties. We developed educational materials tailored to different threats: financial scams targeting retirement accounts, fake utility workers attempting to case homes for burglary, telephone scams aimed at extracting personal information, and imposters like our fake HOA crew. Local law enforcement became enthusiastic partners, with officers volunteering their time to provide updates on new scams appearing in the region. The network expanded organically, with veterans taking the lead in their own communities. We established a buddy system pairing able-bodied veterans with more vulnerable elderly residents, creating both security and much-needed social connection. A simple phone tree evolved into a secure messaging system that could quickly alert community members to emerging threats. Tom Ellis, a former Army communications specialist who had served in Afghanistan, developed a website and secure communication channel for our network. Hannah Washington, who had been military police before retiring to raise her family, organized neighbor watch groups with protocols based on her law enforcement experience. The skills that had served us in wartime found new purpose in peacetime community defense. 6 months into our initiative, we had our first major success beyond the original HOA case: an elderly couple in neighboring Callahan County. Walter Johnson, a 92-year-old World War II veteran, and his wife Edith, were targeted by sophisticated scammers posing as bank officials. The scammers arrived with counterfeit documents claiming the Johnsons' mortgage had been sold to a new company requiring immediate re-registration of their deed. Thanks to our outreach program, the Johnsons' neighbor, David Henderson, a Vietnam-era Air Force veteran who had attended one of our seminars, recognized the warning signs. When the supposed bank officials became pushy about immediate signatures, Henderson calmly stepped in, asked for credentials, and called the verification number we had provided during our presentation. The scammers fled when confronted with this level of scrutiny, but not before Henderson captured photos of their vehicle and partial license plate. Sheriff Martinez's department, working with authorities in Callahan County, identified the scammers as part of a ring that had successfully defrauded elderly homeowners across 3 states. Our network's intervention had not only protected the Johnsons, but provided crucial evidence leading to multiple arrests and the disruption of a major criminal enterprise. That success catalyzed even greater community involvement. Local businesses began sponsoring our educational materials. The regional bank offered free sessions on financial protection. A tech company with a nearby data center provided cybersecurity training tailored for seniors. What had begun as a response to personal violation had transformed into a model of community resilience. 1 year after the fake HOA crew had driven up my driveway, I found myself standing before a different crowd, this time at the state capitol, where our Rural Veterans Protection Network was being recognized as a model program for rural community security. The governor presented us with a commendation, but the real reward was in the statistics. Reported scams targeting veterans and elderly residents down 62% in the counties where our network operated. More meaningful than any official recognition were the stories that reached me from around the state. A retired teacher in East Texas who avoided losing her savings because she remembered our advice about verifying banking communications. An elderly couple in the Panhandle who recognized fake utility workers thanks to one of our information cards posted on their refrigerator. A veterans group in South Texas that had adapted our model for their own community's needs. My quiet ranch remained my sanctuary, but it was no longer an island of isolation. Several evenings a month, I would find myself hosting planning meetings on my porch, the space filled with the voices of fellow veterans and community members working together. Miguel became not just a collaborator, but a close friend, his quick humor and pragmatic approach balancing my sometimes too intense focus. On a personal level, the network filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged. After leaving the SEALs, I had struggled with the loss of purpose that comes when a mission-driven life suddenly lacks clear objectives. Many veterans face this challenge, the disorientation that comes when the highly structured, intensely purposeful military life ends, leaving a vacuum that civilian existence doesn't automatically fill. The Protection Network provided not just me but dozens of other veterans with a new mission that honored our training and experience. We weren't fighting enemies anymore. We were building security. We weren't taking lives. We were improving them. A hypervigilance that could be maladaptive in civilian life became an asset when channeled into community protection. Sheriff Martinez captured it perfectly during one of his now regular visits to my ranch. As we sat watching another Texas sunset, he remarked, "You know, for a guy who moved out here to get away from people, you've sure built yourself a community." I laughed at the irony. "Some missions find you, I guess." "Well," he replied, "this mission suits you better than isolation ever did." He was right. 22 years as a Navy SEAL had prepared me for many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was one I was still learning, that the skills honed in warfare, vigilance, strategy, protecting the vulnerable, had peacetime applications just as vital as their battlefield purposes. The fake HOA crew had intended to exploit vulnerability, but instead revealed strength. They had targeted an individual but inadvertently helped forge a community. In attempting to scam a veteran, they had unwittingly sparked a mission more meaningful than any I had undertaken in uniform, one measured not in objectives achieved or threats eliminated, but in connections formed and dignity preserved. As for those fake HOA enforcers serving their time, I hear prison has very strict rules about lawn maintenance and approved exterior paint colors. Sometimes justice has a sense of humor. But the true justice wasn't found in their punishment. It was in the resilience they helped create, the community they inadvertently strengthened, and the purpose they unknowingly inspired in those they had sought to victimize. That, I've come to believe, is the most powerful form of victory, not just defeating your enemy, but building something better because they forced you to fight.